So, and there's also aspects, ethical predicaments, deploying deception. What's that mean? Basically, this goes into absolutist ethics that, and in this case, I'll talk about Nellie Bly. Um, we will never ever go undercover. We will always be upfront with who we are and reporters and whatever whatever the case is. The story is not worth that, or situational. Looking at the a case by case basis. Okay, what is the issue? What is the issue? What is the openness of the the story? If it needs to be some digging, are you going to get that information from traditional means and research, and people be open with you in interviews, or are you going to need to do things a little differently? And it's you've got the one with the absolute and the other with situation, looking at case by case by basis. I mean, I think it situational, or at least personal for me. Even though I'm very much about being honest and straightforward, and that, as much as possible with that. I mean, if this is not something that should be taken lightly. Situational. You should still try and always be above board with what you're doing. If all else fails and there's no other way you're going to get a story, then it also depends on what you do. All right, and it comes to situational ethics and about getting that story, and still following ethics and still being ethical in what you're doing. But you might need to take an extra step or two if all other avenues and possibilities have been exhausted. So it's tough, and these are the things that part about being a journalist, paying attention to these things, and then also as a standpoint from invading privacy. We're trying you're on the tightrope of public's right to know and a right to privacy for a certain person. Do you talk about some person that, like, maybe the celebrity got into, or maybe a public figure got into a fight at a bar or something like that, and do you put that out? It's the right to know. Is it going to get out anyway? And what's that going to do? And then also there's then there's governmental aspects of it, and talking about that and safety. And so I mean, this is it's a tough. It's not an easy industry. You have to fight through a lot of different decisions and ethical decisions every day, and that's part of it. It's that. And when people say, "Oh, it's not that hard," it's incredibly hard. Between trying to get a story and all the other aspects and all the production you need to know, and all these important decisions and legal things, and it's not. And in the end, a lot of times you're not really known. No one knows who you are. Few people are known out there, but how many people, journalists are out there working? They're working extraordinarily hard, but you have no clue who they are. Doesn't take away from what they're doing. Yeah, you've heard of some, and they're in some big high profile jobs, but for the vast majority, you wouldn't know who they are, or if you do, it's because you follow them very closely and you've noticed the name and you like their work. And so it's a tough position. It's a tough job a lot of times. It's lots of things you got to deal with that other people and other businesses and industries don't have to deal with. The Journalism Code of Ethics, they're warning reporters and editors not to place themselves in positions that produce a conflict of interest. So that means, say you are a food critic. Your job is to go into a restaurant and say if the place is good or bad. It's making sure, and just know that by doing a job, people are going to get to know who you are. And they're probably going to want, hey, don't worry about it. We'll give you free dessert. Oh, the meal is on us. Here's, and you're going to expect at least, and that's why a lot of times these food critics will go to a place and they won't mention that they're going, or people might not know what they look like. So they've got that advantage, but once they do kind of like find out, they might try to get a better review than maybe they should, and it's upon you to stay above that. Just also know that that you're you're gonna, in your journeys as a journalist, you're gonna be meeting a lot of, and interacting with a lot of the same people. People like for PR, people for like for politicians or companies, and these are the people that are putting stuff out, and they're getting stories. You're going to be working with them quite a bit, and it's good to have a professional relationship because you need the story and just human decorum and being polite and nice, but then at the same time, still being a good journalist and knowing they're not your buddies and, oh, do me a solid. Don't necessarily talk about this. If it needs to be talked about, it needs to be talked about. That's that aspect, and also there's times that you could benefit personally. When I talked about like the free meals, but also, and it could also include like access. Well, if you give us good stories, we just might be able to accommodate interviews more often. If you don't, I mean, then that's that's not a good thing, but it happens. Or also, if you think about it, there's the reason they talk about. They always kind of tell people, oh, if you're a journalist, try not to have like a side gig in this. It's like owning something, a business or something like that, on the side, because sometimes you might find yourself in a position where you're covering a story, and say you have a bar or something, just an example, and you know for a fact that maybe the city council is going to pass something that could either be beneficial to you because of that and help your bottom line. That's one of the reasons they say not to get involved with that, with having businesses like that, because you never know when something like that can pop up and then affect your coverage. So that's, if you want to do that kind of thing, you want to own something like that. Once you're done with your journalism career, if you then okay, own what you want. But when you're in there, don't put yourself in a situation that would cause that kind of thing. You don't want to benefit personally, all right? Especially the stories that you produce from that. It's it's not ethical. You're not really a journalist, all right? So there's a lot of rules. It's the way it is. Okay, and there's some things we need to focus on. Also, I go back to the 1840s. Telegraph was invented. We all talked about, we know how that increased communication. So, well, one part of that was news. It was able to travel much quicker. And then stories got out much quicker because of that. You didn't have to wait forever to get a story. It was basically almost at least instant for them back then. And it was very, very quick. So it's that changed things with how news was covered, and now you have more and more technology, and lots of times you're finding things that are created now, and what happened there. You got a lot less analysis, especially with political things and contexts of history, in an effort to get it fast, get it quick. We see that today, where you don't want to kind of like think about what happened in the past, and it goes back to that old, why is it important to know history? It's those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it, and I think we're seeing that very much today, and in a in a an effort to get the quickest news and most news with the technology and a lot of venues that we have to put it out. We're seeing less and less knowledge of history, even though we have all these wonderful technologies that have give us information. We just don't know it, and we kind of just forget about it, or we just ignore it. And you're not understanding like current news, and this is really important. Things that happen now, in a lot of cases, are developments of things that have been going on up until that point. So you'll find any number of stories can be from many things that happened before, and that gets lost a lot. That gets lost in the boom, the breaking news. People forget about that. It's like what led up to this event. Oh, we don't know. Oh, it just happened. Okay, here we got breaking news. Here are the details. Boom, 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 boom. But then after that, you don't go any deeper. Why did this happen? And they scathe or they look into it and they don't go that deep. And since people didn't know the history before of what happened, it gets lost, and we don't really learn lessons. No lessons are really learned. It's just news is put out, content's out there, people are reading it, watching it, or listening to it. And that's all they really care about, because then they can get their advertising. And hey, look at this, and then what are you? Or you're putting creating stories in a certain way, so a certain niche will read, listen, or watch what you're doing. And then once again, you can charge more for advertising. And that's another aspect too. Where does being a journalist is harder than ever with that aspect too. Is what are they looking at as opposed to what stories are they for the audience of your given area? Are they really important, or is it just garbage? And you're losing lots of context and the steps leading into it. People don't want to think about that. It's easier to not to. It's our job to make sure they do that again, and we have to do it again. And people think we need to make people smarter, not just okay, whatever, I got what I need. It's not helping you, and it's not helping us as a society. There's also a debate on a couple different aspects. Getting a good story. All right. I consider myself a storyteller, supposed to be a purveyor of the truth. Lots of times when people are doing their stories, they forget they're journalists, and a lot of times become screenplay writers or novelists, and for the drama of a story, they forget the main tenets and the truth and the basic facts of that story. Now, you can still tell a good narrative story with characters, and to best show an issue or topic or something like that, but you have to do it in a responsible way. It can't go show a bias or a preference. Either way, you have to try to best represent it as best you can. Now, if the other side to that is, truly that bad, I mean, really, because lots of times it's the way things are portrayed now. It's not realistic in a lot of ways. It just fits their brand. It's not about fitting a brand. It's about telling a story. And there's lots of great stories out there. But trying to do it in the most responsible way as possible. Oh, this sounds good, but it has to be true. It has to be right. Because this isn't a movie. This isn't a TV show. You can do that with because it's fiction. It's supposed to be real, and when people go to your venue to take in what you are producing, they are expecting it to be true stories, real truth, and not some over dramatized thing. So you think a certain way. That's not what we're supposed to be doing. And then there's the whole standpoint of getting a story first. This is just I've seen this so many times before. This is why the 2000 election acted that ended up the way it did, because my station called, my network called it for Bush, because somebody in the the Bush family worked for us, and they were in contact with the headquarters because he was part of the family, and they went by that as, oh yeah, Florida's going to be called for us, and that wound up stirring on lawsuits, Gore versus Bush, and Chads, and punch cards, and what's Dimple Chad, and it's just. And I've cut so much video to that was just, I swore I'd never name my, no offense to anybody named Chad or anybody who may know Chad, but I said because of that I would never name my son named Chad because of that. They what they did was oh, we got it, we're gonna break it first, and for a while there they've gotten better. It still happens. If you look at Kobe Bryant and TMZ, they mentioned that he had died and his daughter died before the family knew, and they did it to get first. I mean, that's TMZ, and that brings another question of what people are watching and listening and referring to as trustworthy. Are they truly trustworthy? Lots of times they're not. Yeah, they might be good at certain things, but being good at journalism might not be one of them. And following certain ethical standards might not be one of them. And maybe not putting out fully truthful things in an unbiased manner might not be one of them. They might have an agenda, but they're in a corporate structure that wants them to do some things, and they want to attract a certain demographic, and they know that makes the demographic, they're attracted to what they do and how they do it, and how is that affecting them and how they think and what they're putting out. That's all part of it. I mean, it's not just stories. I know there's a lot of heavy stuff, but this is your mind and how you view things. You think that, am I being told the truth? Is what I'm taking in truthful, honest, and not just playing to certain beliefs? It's because if you don't know the truth, don't know what's actually going on, and it's being twisted in a way that's not truthful, can you make a good decision? Are you viewing it in a fully open way? Are you getting the total story? Another aspect of getting stories is what we call Reliant Experts. Though journalists a lot of the time experience and interview and do so many different stories and so much research on things, in ways they become experts because they've had to go and deep so much and talk to so many different people and done research on their own. But to be a good journalist, one of the things that we do is we get authorities on certain things to add to that story. I mean, you can talk about stuff, especially scientific stuff or math stuff. That's my personal things. You'll want to talk to someone who that's basically their life, and plus it also takes the onus off you of being that quote unquote expert. You're supposed to be the journalist and telling the story, and it's probably better off that you have somebody who is an actual expert in that, even though you may be well versed with it. It's just probably do that. And a lot of times we do become a little dependent on it. Sometimes it's harder to tell a story if you can't find a person. Also, lots of times what we'll do, reporters will do, is using these experts, and to do a narrative story, they'll create conflict where conflict may not be there, or they might be conflict there, and it's not as pronounced, or in actual reality isn't as big a conflict as it's portrayed, because they're trying to tell the best story possible, and then they're not giving the right weight to that conflict, because we're going to have a great story. It's something you got to pay attention to. And the fact that a lot of times these experts are Caucasian and male, a lot of the times that they say there's an over representation of that. So we have that aspect, and then trying to be neutral and being an expert. One of the things that would happen, and you're seeing a lot, especially in television news, people who are brought in as quote unquote experts on these networks, on all sorts of networks and television shows, and they're actually just journalists, and they're not really experts. They're just telling you what what they've learned, and they may have learned quite a bit, but they're not really the experts in what they're talking about. And then they stop being journalists and they start being celebrities, and they're experts on this. No, not really. They're really just journalists, and that becomes a problem too. And and part of it is expediency, ease of getting somebody in to interview for that, and it causes a whole other, and that causes a problem for the network or channel using you as an expert, and then your credibility as a journalist. And you start getting a big head. Not to mention, I forgot to remember, I'm not really the expert for this. I'm just telling that story, and I'm not being used as a reporter, but I'm used as an expert. And you're not really. It's not really the case. These are all problems and issues within journalism. So, and that's part of it. Yeah, we need to talk to resources, but got to be careful with it. Balancing story conflict. Balance. You hear balance, presenting all sides of an issue, trying to show that you don't favor a position. Sometimes they do it, sometimes they don't. Sometimes you don't have people on one side that are returning your calls or doing any comments, so it makes it even harder. There are problems like time. You go out, and especially locally, you go out, you're supposed to get your story within that day and have it shot, edited, and ready for air by the end of the day. Plus, you've definitely done some other things, smaller stories in the course of a day, and you got to do those, and the other aspects of online and on the website, and other aspects and social media, and it's just more and more and more and more. And there's only a certain amount of time that you can do it in. So time and space constraints, turnaround for it, how much time you're given, especially you're talking in the and space for, so you're talking about space for like a newspaper or a magazine or online. How many words do they want from you? You got to tell a story in a certain amount of time. And same with news. The average news, what we call package, isn't more than a minute and a half long, if that. I've cut 1 minute packages, cut less than 1 minute packages. And it used to be, and sometimes they'll reach to 2, not as much as it used to. More features definitely then are longer, but especially at the local level, minute and a half, 1:15 to a minute and a half. That's how long the packages usually are. So those are the full feature stories, and it's cutting more and more time because we need more and more and more stuff. So that's part of the problem. So these are all these aspects that I'm trying to tell the story as best as possible. How do you balance that in such a short period of time? Also, misrepresentation of the complexity of social issues. Are they being put out there in a way that is truthful, or is it being pushed in one way or in another because of any plethora of reasons, personal of that journalist, or the view of the venue that they work for, because they might have an agenda as well, or just, that's just what we're supposed to kind of think, and that's what everyone else is doing. That's part of it. People don't like to, and that's another aspect, is to dig. And you're digging, and they don't want to dig because it's not what everyone else is saying, and they're not. And we don't have that many people, and there's so many aspects to it because there's less and less people at newsrooms all the time. So it makes it even harder to tell those stories and investigate because they're not putting the time and the money, and they're just trying to get stuff in, get stuff out. And that's another problem with things. There's so many levels. I keep telling you more and more. And claiming neutrality makes them appear value free. Are they value free? Should it be? I mean, it depends on the story. It depends on what's going on in that story, what you find. Not what you think you're going to find and wrap it around in the way you want to wrap it that way or present it that way. What have you found and what do the facts show you? Did you do appropriate digging? I found enough to how I want to make the story, or I don't have time. I just here. This will be fine. That's part of it too. It is. I've seen it time and again. So that's all part of balance and telling the story. So it's really important. And then we, as the press, acting as adversaries, because we are the fourth estate. We're the ones who are supposed to keep an eye on those people in power, either political or business, because there's power in corporate structures as well. As they directly affect the people and making sure people aren't being ripped off or they're being hurt in some way because of corporate interests, physically, mentally, whatever. That's us being the journalists we're supposed to be and following that important role of being protector, telling the truth. So what is, you don't want to be a complete jerk all the time, but it's know that there's an understanding between you and political figures that it'll be friendly and cordial and respectful, but I have a job to do, and if there's an issue or there's a problem, don't expect me to not ask you these questions, because it's my job to do that. And it's a two-way street, that you have a job to do and I have a job to do, and it can get out of control sometimes. Try not to. And some journalists who call themselves journalists intentionally will poke and do things just to make themselves part of the story. Oh, look at me, I'm a great journalist. I keep poking. Sometimes the poking is deserved, no doubt, and then sometimes they just do it to say, hey, look, I'm me. I'm being a jerk to this person because we all hate that person. So then you become the story, and then you're not a journalist. You've crossed that line, and it's there's lots of lines you have to keep an eye on being a journalist. Being tough with your questioning, and that's part of. I've done lots of interviews, and parts it's sometimes you have to ask tough questions, and sometimes they're not going to like it. But the question is do you do it in a fair way because the question needs to be asked? Or are you doing it to try to set someone up? Are you trying to make someone look bad when you're doing that, and how you're framing it and feeling a room? And that's part of it. Say a press conference, I'm feeling a room and seeing how something's going. And there you'll find sometimes that journalists will sometimes work behind the scenes beforehand. It's like, yeah, if I get there, I'll talk about this. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And then there's sometimes you can just, when you're feeling a room and seeing how things are going, oh, I'm going to get this person with this. It's almost like entrapment in a way. Sometimes it depends on the story. Once again, it depends on the nature of the story. But if you're doing that to make yourself look, oh, I'm an awesome journalist and I got him, I got this person again, and you're not really adding anything to that story, or you're just trying to have a good soundbite or make someone look dumb or corrupt when they might not be corrupt. They may be corrupt, and then they might have deserved it. But trying to get a rise out of someone or something like that, or asking an inappropriate question and use what you might have gotten in a way that misrepresents something. Lots of misrepresentation goes on. Not full sound bites being put out and the way it's written up beforehand completely takes it out of context, completely changes the story, and completely misrepresents that person in a negative light. And isn't there libel laws? Yeah, there's libel laws, but they can still toe the line just enough so it wouldn't be considered libel. And if you remember, libel is hard to prove. And I was just doing my job, and lots of times they do get away with it. Don't be like that. Be fair. If you have to be tough when they deserve to be tough, because there are people who deserve that because they've done something wrong. Sometimes it's we just don't like them. You can't do that. It doesn't matter what you like. All right, it has no clue matter. It doesn't matter at all who or what you like. You have a job to do, and you have to do it in a professional manner. That's what we are. We're professionals.